Well, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever in the world you are connecting from. It is great to have you all with us today. Please let us know where in the world you are connecting from. Please put it on the chat. I am sure that your the, the community connected in this chat today will be keen to know and to network with you, to know where you're connecting from. If you have any questions throughout this conversation, please post it in the chat. We are going to be trying to bring some of those questions to the panel. We're going to have two panels today, and I think everybody's in different time zones. I am in Pacific time zone, so if you can make quickly the math, the first panel will go up to 8:45 a.m. Pacific time, and the second panel will begin at 8:50 Pacific time. So once again, thank you everybody for connecting. We have an amazing and powerful panel today, and I am incredibly thankful for their generosity to be here with us to talk about this powerful, insightful conversation that we are going to be having today about from awareness to reconciliation. And before getting into the conversation, I want to say a couple of things. One of Kennedy's favorite quote was paraphrasing the Divine Comedy by Dante. And the quote goes something like this: "The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who remain neutral in times of moral crisis." And I think right now we are living in times of moral crisis in many different aspects. Racism and discrimination, of course, is the topic of the day, and is one of the factors that is creating this moral crisis that we have. And remaining neutral, whether as an individual or as an organization or as a nature function, is perhaps the biggest disservice that we can do to our profession, to our employees, and to the future of our organizations and our societies. I gotta say, I was telling Ashira and Stacy before that my area of expertise is not this that we're gonna be talking about today. So I gotta say that my heart is pumping faster than it ever has pumped in any conversation that I've done live. I'm usually not feeling nervous, but I am today. And the reason is because this conversation is pushing me out of what I normally do in my work in Hacking HR every day. And it feels okay to be pushed that way. It feels okay because we got to talk about the things that we're going to be talking about today. And if you don't feel some level of discomfort by talking about important, powerful conversations in the workplace, maybe you don't care that much about it. And I am encouraging you to have these conversations at work with your HR function, with your people, even when they feel a little bit uncomfortable. That is okay. I think we're all in this fight together, if you will, and we're all trying to do the right thing together. That's why we're here in this conversation. So once again, I am encouraging you to not remain neutral in times of moral crisis, to take action. We spend 1/3 of our lives in the workplace. I think it's just painful to me that some workplaces are so oblivious to what's going on to not even talk about those things. And that's why we're putting this conversation about racism, discrimination, and hate, and from that reality to love, unity, and reconciliation. So I'm hoping that you take action in your organization, whether it is with your small team, with your leadership team, with the organization at large. Take action. Don't remain neutral. Having said that, once again, I want to welcome this amazing panel: Stacy Lewis and Ashira, Annie Lou, Colin, and Anju. We're going to have an amazing conversation, and it's going to be very spontaneous. So for everybody to know, we did not have a script of questions before, so very open to any of the questions you want to be asking. Same thing with the panel. And first of all, I want to begin by, of course, asking you to introduce yourself as you maybe respond to to some of the questions that we're having. I want to begin by saying this: some people say out there something that is very true, which is all lives matter, and that is true. I don't think any of us would ever think that some lives matter more than others. But in times of difficulty for the Black Americans in this country, we say Black Lives Matter because what we see going on with police brutality, racial injustices, systemic racism in our institutions and in the workplace. If somebody comes to you, and I'm beginning very controversially here, I'm very powerful with our conversation. If somebody comes to you with this idea of, yes, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter, what do you say to them? How do you inspire them to understand that that is true, but we have to take care of part of our population, part of our fellow citizens and friends and colleagues that are being subjected to systemic injustices and racism? So open question for anybody who wants to jump in first.
I'll go first. I'll just ask them a simple question. Right now, there's so much focus on COVID-19. Don't all problems matter? There are so many health crises that happen. Why are we focused right now on COVID-19? It's right here, it's right now. It's so evident that it needs our attention and we need to give it equal importance. And the social systemic oppression, injustice is nowhere even close to COVID-19. It impacts so many more people, has been impacting for 450 years. So that would be my short answer.
Yeah,
Stacey, you're oh, sorry, Anilu, and then Stacey was muted.
You know, I think that all the best lessons you can learn in kindergarten, and I happen to have a kindergarten boy, and if you have observed them during the recess, if some kid gets pushed to the ground, the teacher goes to that kid. I don't think that the teacher is saying that she doesn't care about the rest of the kindergartners, but in that moment, it's not only that that kid needs help, but that it's important for the teacher, who's the figure of authority and the role model for that classroom, to say that that's not okay and that she's gonna or he is gonna devote their attention to that particular kid. So this is no different. We know that this is not right, and we as a society haven't stood up clearly enough, and the time has come.
Thank you, Anilu. Stacey?
So, Stacey Lewis, I serve as the Chief HR Officer for the Port of Long Beach, and I'm the creator of HR Interrupted. And I love what Angela and Annalou say. Here's what I would say to that. If all lives matter, then why do we have to say Black Lives Matter, right? And when people say all lives matter, because Enrique, you said you want to have the conversation, so let's have it. It makes people feel okay. It makes them feel okay what's going on, right? For so long, there's been this systemic problem of racism in the workplace. Police brutality, we see that, but in the workplace. So when people say all lives matter, it gives them a comfort zone. There's a wonderful post where this young lady, she depicts it, and she has a house on fire, and the house is on fire, and someone's in there, and she says, my house is on fire. And the other person says, well, what about my house? And she says, well, what do you mean, what about my house? My house matters. And then a young lady says, but this house is on fire and people are dying. So it just makes people feel comfortable about themselves. And so my response has always been, okay, if all lives truly matter, then why in 2020 do we have to say Black Lives Matter?
That is powerful.
I also, this is Colin Mincy from Human Rights Watch. I just got a spirit of energy from Stacey. I think it's important that we look back at where the Black Lives Matter movement really intensified. And that was in Baltimore when Freddie Gray, already in police custody, was brutally and physically attacked and died, right? And so I think we're at a moment, and this moment feels a little bit different, that we're going beyond these meaningless conversations about how complex race and racial justice and diversity is. And the Black Lives Matter movement and saying Black Lives Matter, to me, is an intentionality that things that have happened to people of color in the United States and around the world are not okay. And this cycle of us rallying in the streets for the next Black person who's died at the hands of needless violence is not okay. And in order for us to move forward and have conversations and change infrastructure that supports and protects people who embody these dangerous principles, we actually need everybody. So we need all people to join the Black Lives Matter movement so that we can collectively end this cycle that's gone on for too many years and that year after year produces more and more victims.
Thank you for mentioning that, Colin. And actually, I saw recently, following up your lead, Stacey, I saw a board from somebody in a protest saying, it's not Black Americans versus white Americans or one race versus the other. It's everybody against racism and discrimination and hate.
Correct.
And that's why I think it's so important to bring this conversation to the workplace. And because I posted this morning on my LinkedIn saying there are 2 or 3 battlegrounds where we're fighting this battle for unity, love, reconciliation. One of them, of course, is outside in the streets, people protesting to bring attention to what's going on and to promote change, which is already happening, by the way. Several police departments already making decisions on reforms to the ways they work because of the recent protests that we're seeing over the past 2 or 3 weeks. That's one battleground. Of course, home is a different battleground, but yet very important. When people talk to their families, to their friends, to their children about racism and discrimination, and evidently the workplace is another one which has remained somewhat shielded with this idea of only diversity and inclusion as how many women we have in the boards of our company and how many women CEO, but the conversation goes way beyond that. So getting into the conversation of the workplace, the path from racism, discrimination in that may happen in the workplace, even police department. I tell people, even police departments are workplaces. And I always think, what is HR doing in that one workplace where those police brutalizing George Floyd or many other, people over time? Where was HR? So beginning with this conversation of the workplace, what would you say should be the first thing that HR leaders should be doing to address these issues and to bring the conversation to their workplaces?
So if I could start with this, I did a piece on my Instagram right after Mr. George Floyd died about HR, and it was in essence an apologetic letter to his family, because whether we like it or not, HR contributed to that. The said police officer had all of these complaints in his file, right? He had all of these complaints in his file. And so what I want to say today to everybody who's out there, that first of all, I want to free our HR influencers. For so long, we have been asking for permission. We've been asking to be validated. We've been asking to sit at the table. I would submit to you today, we own the table. In this conversation regarding race and how we're going to move in the workplace, HR owns the table. This is the safe place where this conversation has to take place. And we have to be willing. First of all, we have to not want to be validated anymore. That's the first thing. And then we have to be okay with remaining. It's going to be a lonely place. It's lonely there, but we have to have the grit. That's why, like you, Enrique, that's why I created HR Interrupter, because I want to appeal to HR influencers who have the grit with credibility, that's their knowledge base, to interrupt the narrative and those historical ideologies and principles that continue to foster these injustices. And so we can no longer sit back and hide behind, we just recruit, we do selection, we do employee relations, we do workers' comp. That's the function. But our primary goal is that we took an oath to protect the workplace. And so all those nameless, faceless, voiceless people who have not been heard for so long are counting on each and every one of us to sit in our rightful place. And it's a call to action. Yes. And if you're not going to do it, then it's okay for you to say that you're not going to do it, right? But if you decide to do it, you got to go gangbuster.
That is amazing, Stacey. I want to turn it over to Ashira, and I know, Ashira, you bring not only the amazing experience that you have as an HR leader, but also your personal story. You know, we were sharing a little bit about this, about the apartheid in South Africa, your family, and so you have experienced not only the conversation at work, but also in your own flesh, right? What hate and violence against one race means for a country or for a society. So what can you say about bringing this conversation of racism and discrimination and the path from there to awareness and reconciliation in the workplace?
First of all, my heartfelt emotions and partnering with all of my colleagues on this panel who are from the Black community, from people of colored communities. I really feel this deeply as a South African who grew up in the tail end of the apartheid era and then through the change of the Mandela era, and never really thought I was going to experience this again. I think I was reflecting with Enrico about the change in South Africa through the years, and what I saw there compared to here. And I think that while apartheid was a hate and a wrong discrimination and racism that was government endorsed and enforced, there was a pivotal moment of change. When Mandela got freed and the new South Africa was born, there was a collective community that came together to work to change this actively. And nobody for 1 second is going to tell you that South Africa is perfect. But we all understood that it's going to take generations of active effort to re-educate and to change how we think and how we behave and how we feel. And the biggest difference for me, and I say this, you know, as a Canadian, as a proud Canadian, and very grateful to Canada for my citizenship in the 20 years I've had here, is the absolute danger that I've been going on for no one understands, of political correctness and politeness, which lets you think things and not say them, and that makes it okay. And it's not okay. And when we grew up in South Africa, one of the advantages that we had was the ability to have very direct communication and conversations with each other. And if I said something, for example, now on a South African panel, you know, maybe I would say something wrong or offensive, and Stacey might jump at me and say, "What are you saying that for? How can you say that? That's wrong," right? And I would be like, "What did I say that was wrong?" And we'd actually chat it out in public. In Canada, that wouldn't happen, right? People would think it, not necessarily say it, or politely kind of call out, maybe you could do this another way, but you don't learn as fast. And you don't directly communicate, which means you also don't directly understand. And I feel that in the US, a lot of this has simmered for a long time under the surface. You feel that it's there, but you can't quite put your finger on it. And then it explodes, and everybody's like, where did this come from? But it's always been there. It's always been there. And what I love about this moment, as painful as it is for all of us watching it and all of us experiencing it even more, is that it's finally time to have the conversations.
Thank you for saying that, Ashira, because one thing that once again, I'm going to use a little bit of the South African culture here by speaking my heart. To me, the question is, how many more people have to be brutalized for us to say it's enough? Like, not, you know, not anymore. You know, we don't just want to go out to protest for 1 week because what happened to this person, and then we go back to normal after this. And I am hoping that we achieved and we reached a pivotal moment right now with the three, you know, what happened with Christian Cooper in Central Park in New York, what happened with Ahmaud Arbery 3 months ago, which only came to the surface, you know, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and of course what happened with George Floyd. And one thing that I'm observing, and I'm not sure if you would agree with this, is more workplaces coming to the realization that they have to address this at work, that they have to talk about it because they remained neutral for so long. So I want to turn over the conversation, the focus from the conversation from HR leaders a little bit to actual business leaders who may feel sometimes that they want to start the conversation, but they don't know how to do it because they don't want to be, quote unquote, like you said before, Ashira, politically incorrect, even if they need to. And they may feel, some level of pressure to not participate in this conversation because it may feel political, political as in Democrats versus Republicans and not as in humans and everybody versus racists. So what do you say to those business leaders on how to initiate this conversation?
So I just want to jump in here and just maybe take one step even further back to what you're saying, because I don't believe that it has to be all about brutalism, brutal behavior and violence, physical violence. I think there's such a thing as emotional violence, not seeing people for who they are. I think it's equally as damaging. And again, my history, and I bring also a Jewish legacy. I have my own personal suffering through all of this in stories of lust and hatred and violence. But, Mandela is often quoted, and I'm going to just read this because I don't want to, reframe his words. But no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And I really believe this starts at education. It starts in schools. It starts in the way we talk to our kids. It starts with dealing with these things when they happen in the moment. It starts with workplaces of real, crucial conversations about things that happen in the moment when they happen and feedback of how to do it more appropriately, and sometimes even using humor to illustrate how some of this, so that when people make mistakes, you can step back and laugh at it and not build fear about never saying something again. We need all kinds of tools. But I don't think this is about physical violence in the workplaces. I think for a workplace, this is a lot about learning to respect each other as human beings first. And then the other thing is to not take an approach of everybody's okay so long as we do it all the same way. The point of diversity is because you bring something different. Yeah. And I have to actually respect everyone around me because of their differences, not in spite of their differences. If you can add some context that makes me stop and think, I wouldn't have done it that way. Or I wouldn't have thought about it that way. That's what I'm searching for every day.
One pattern that I'm seeing in this conversation is this dual idea of having safe places to have this conversation, even when the conversation feels uncomfortable, which is really, really powerful, because in that safe place, we're going to be talking about things that not everybody knows how to talk about them or feel comfortable talking about them. So I'm enjoying the pattern that we are creating here. Colin, I want to ask you, you are the CHRO, Human Rights Watch, and of course you observe what's going on all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world when it comes to violations of human rights and countries doing the right thing. What has been your experience with countries that may have had some of these that we're dealing with in America right now, but they have turned things around, and they are walking, maybe they are not there yet, but they are walking in the right direction, if you will. What ingredients have you observed in these countries that have addressed these issues of racism and discrimination and violence and hate in the workplace and in life in general? But now they are, as I said before, trying to walk in the right direction. You're muted, by the way.
Yes, what I said before I was muted was just brilliant, I assure you. Look, if you look at movements of any kind, right? So if we brought in the question to go beyond race, or we talk about women's rights, or other conflicts that have happened around the world, I heard Stacey talk earlier about grit. There's a point in the level where the people rise up and say enough is enough, and they organize and they form really powerful partnerships to inform and encourage and even push out people who are in power, so that the right principles and the right things for their community are heard and recognized. So so part of it is getting access to power, getting access to being decision making, whether we're talking about the workplace or we're talking about countries or governments. And unfortunately, in the United States and around the world, usually something has to go wrong, right? We hit rock bottom, and then we gather, and then we have these really important conversations about what has to happen differently. And sometimes around the world, that has come and been informed by violence, or the consequences and the persecution of people who are standing up for principle and standing up for what is right. I hope that's not part of the ingredients that we need to have in this country. And then the second thing I'd have to say is that, and I think Ashir did a really good job of touching on this, is this conversation about race and inclusion. It's everywhere, right? It's you can see it and experience it in the tale of two educations in this country. You can see and experience it in disparate sentencing for people of color and non-people of color. How people re-enter society, how we supported people from a public health perspective to the COVID-19 argument. So government has to be involved, business leaders have to be involved, educators have to be involved, religious leaders have to be involved. We've got to get to a place where there's a coordinated effort that the people who are in power, who are not doing the right thing, are replaced, and that the principles and the ideals that will carry the day on behalf of the people are actually recognized in our policies, in legislation, in our hiring practices, and the ways that we organize and manage businesses. It has to be, everyone's hands need to be together and moving these conversations forward. I think people are tired of us talking about this. We've got to do something. Yeah.
So Colin, and Colin, if I could jump on that. And then as we talk about a diversity inclusion, and there's always been, it's almost become cliche in organizations, right? And so because we are here for this point. And so what I would also submit to the workplace is, I deem it as diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being able, when you get to the dance, right, you can dance. But belonging means that you were active participant in planning the party, right? Diversity, you get invited to the party. Inclusion, you are able to dance. And belonging is that you were actively part of planning the party. And so as we're moving forward with this, the other thing, and I heard yesterday on a podcast from Viva Lamash, and she said this wonderful about, as we're having this conversation, panel members and HR family, the space that we create, we need to create honest space. And one of the things she said that for Black and brown people, we might just need to let us have this conversation by ourselves for a moment, right? And let's create a space for our non-people of color to have it, because it's too critical for us just to hide behind diversity inclusion initiatives. We're just going to have this conversation. Let's start the conversation. It's too raw. Right? It's too raw because it's been so long in the workplace. I'm a female person of color. Why do you get to tell me when I finish a presentation that I'm articulate? Why do you get to tell me that, right? What would I be? Or why, when I do my presentation, right, or I bring something forward, you ask me, has it been vetted? But as Shira, I'm just going to use you because you're there and you're safe. But when Shira does hers, you don't ask her if it's vetted. See, it's those unconscious, it's those microaggressions, right, that we really got to talk about. We see the brutality out there. But for this dialogue, it's those things. It's me, who I tell my teacher that my daughter comes home and says that she's dirty, and she tells me kids will be kids. Yeah. It's me when I'm in the elevator with Colin and a white lady walks in and says, oh my God, the bus drivers around here dress very nicely, right? It's me when I go to the store, everybody in front of me checks out, then I get there and you ask me, can you have my EBT card? Those is at that level that we need to really address where we are in the workplace to really have these conversations.
I love that. I love that you say that, Stacey. And connecting with what Colin said before, it is a collective effort. It doesn't just happen at work or at home or on the streets. It is a collective effort by everybody in everything. And we one of the things that I wanted to do with the conversation today, and the reason why I named it, from awareness to reconciliation, is precisely for what you're saying, Stacey, which is very often people don't think that a comment, an action, or the implications of those comments or those actions on others. And they may become microaggressions that over time, by everybody in a workplace, especially if it's a non-diverse workplace, they end up having an effect on the people upon which those microaggressions are being exerted, right? So I'm loving that you're bringing that conversation to the table. Anilu, I want to turn it over to you. And from awareness to reconciliation, and we know, and I think we can all agree that change most of the times begins by awareness, by becoming aware of what's going on, because otherwise we don't even know what we have to change. How do we inspire HR leaders to become more aware of these social issues that we're dealing with? One of them, of course, the topic of the day, which is discrimination and racism against Black Americans. But even beyond that, right? I mean, there are many other social issues that HR leaders have to get their hands on, become very aware about what they mean, their implications in the workplace, and then transform that into something that can have a positive result, if you will, a policy, a practice, a strategy that can turn over the negative into positive. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that we've covered in this panel, we've identified the framework for all of you in terms of what's been going on. I think that the important part now is, what do we do about it? And there are two words that I feel haven't really been mentioned as much as I would like in the conversations that I'm hearing in different firms. One of them is leadership. Mm-hmm. The reason why people need to have this conversation, it's because it really comes down to leadership. And it's about taking a stance on something that matters to your employees. And it might matter for different reasons, and they might be coming at it from a different perspective, but you don't have to be diverse to care about this conversation. And so I do think that what there's a disproportionate impact on employees of color and our Black employees, for sure. The reality is that families and people are a lot more complex than that in this world. And so I do think that we all have to stop making assumptions also about who will care about this conversation. That being said, what the panel said before, if you're in HR, you need to educate yourself before you try to educate others on this topic. And none of us should assume that because you've been in HR for a long time, you've spent enough time understanding diversity and inclusion. And one of the things that have happened over the years is that as we've created, chief diversity roles and diversity and inclusion teams, and listen, I was chief diversity officer at Goldman for many years. I believe in that role greatly, but we devoted so much attention to that group leading that other HR professionals took a step back and didn't do the work during those years to really put themselves in a position where they could lead. And so now it's the time. And so I encourage you, if you're in HR and you feel like you don't have all the tools, that's okay. But reach out and educate yourself, because you will be looked at within your organization to lead. The other word, it happens to be also with L, but I want this to be long lasting. As I reflect about 2016 and me having been in a chief diversity role at Goldman then, and now being the chief human resources officer at TPG, I would say that the energy of the moments that followed all the deaths that we witnessed in 2016 faded in about 3-4 months. And everyone went back to what they considered to be their day job. And I think that there's some very simple things that you can do this time to avoid that from happening. One, make sure that you're involving a broad set of allies. People that have not participated before, spend the time to educate them, but don't let them off the hook because they might not know what to say. Second, put events, ask for commitment, ask for conversations for the next year. Do it now. We're all very energized right now. By the way, we're all exhausted because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Make sure that you hold yourself accountable as an HR professional to talk to people about your commitment a year from now. A year from now, what do you want to see different in this organization and how are you going to contribute? And here's the menu of options. And then the third thing that I would say is we do need to meet our organizations where they're at. Some organizations actually have been talking about race. And so their journey is going to be different. Some organizations, and I heard you talk about, for example, boards. And we at TPG, for example, had an initiative on gender. It started with gender. Last year, at the end of the year, we decided that we were going to talk about race, ethnicity, sexual orientation as part of who we wanted to see represented in the boards. So all of us, no matter how much you've done, can do more and can get more. And then my last thing would be, I think that people really need to understand that conversation is great, but the things that actually change people's trajectory at work are very micro and what I call hand-to-hand combat. It's who gets mentored by whom. It's who gets staffed on the fancy, sexy project. Is who gets to go to the meeting. And all of those things go to who gets promoted, who gets talked about as a superstar, and who gets paid. So if we leave this conversation just that making sure that people are educated, but we don't translate that into the things that matter at work, then we've lost the battle. And so I'm very optimistic, actually, that because we've been preparing for this moment as a profession, that we will seize the moment and that we're going to hold not other people accountable, but we will hold ourselves accountable as well.
I think that is powerful, Anilu, because it's part of what we initiated the conversation today with was about this idea of not letting the momentum of change die, if you will, and ride this wave for as long time and create the next wave of change as we're riding this one wave right now. Because like you said, and this reality for the conversation that we're having today about racism and discrimination and going from awareness to reconciliation, but it's also true for COVID-19 and for many other things that are happening in life and work right now. How do we make sure that the things that we're talking about and acting upon that are positive results of horrifying experiences, how can we make sure that momentum continues over time?
And Enrique, just on that, because I happen to also lead our crisis management effort, and I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with people like, well, what are the things that once we get out of this situation, we're gonna keep? Because there are good things that have come out of us working from home. We should be asking the same thing, about this conversation. It shouldn't be about the moment. What are the things that now will become the standard of how leaders lead?
That is incredible. I gotta say, I make a mistake with this panel, and the mistake was it's too little of time. I just can't believe that we're almost at 45 minutes over the hour. I just don't know. This is a powerful conversation that may become an ongoing, talking about riding the wave. I want to take 1 second to acknowledge everybody who's connected on the LinkedIn Live. I haven't been able to look. There's so much stuff going on in there in the chat. I have not been able to follow through all the comments. I apologize for that. All these panelists that are joining us today are the most wonderful leaders that you will find out there, incredibly approachable. So if you want to continue the conversation with any one of them, I am sure that they will be very keen to connect with you. And in the 4 or 5 minutes that we have left in this conversation, I want to ask you to maybe leave our community those connected online right now with one actionable insight. What I know, it's, like you said before, Anilu, it can get really overwhelming, because it's like crisis management, it's COVID-19, is the protest, for police brutality, is discrimination, but it's also turning that into something that we can learn from and turn into something positive for the future. But if there was one thing, one actionable insight that you could share with this community for them to start doing, not tomorrow, not the week after now, but right now after this conversation, what would that actionable insight could be? Andrew, I want to start with you to provide this idea, if you will.
Yeah, so one of the way to approach this would be acknowledge race-based injustices, identify symptoms of these injustices that exist at workplace, and where our leaders can have the most influence, and take action to address these in the entire cycle of talent management. And I would just say one more line: if you're not intentionally including, you're unintentionally excluding.
Wow.
Mhm.
That's
I'll go
quite a
next.
tagline. Whoa. Powerful.
Mine would be, to everybody out there in HR, you matter. What we do matters, and it's very, very important. And again, I cannot emphasize that we no longer have to ask permission to do our job and to take care of you. I love what Annalu said about the long haul. And for the long haul, if we don't take care of ourselves, we are not going to be able to take care of anybody else. So when the plane comes down, adjust your mask first, because you're going to have to assist in putting on a lot of masks moving forward. Take care of you.
Thank you, Stacey.
I would say Stacey took part of mine, but I'm
Sorry.
nimble, so it's fine. So
She read your mind.
There's an audience out there who are HR leaders and people of color, and forced with in a different way of separating our own pain and frustration and anger with the duty of care responsibility to look after the people we're responsible for, and to be influential leaders to ensure that our institutions are living our values. And so on an individual front, I would encourage people to get involved with groups, community groups and other groups who are sort of on the front lines fighting these injustices, if you feel inspired to do so. And on a professional basis, start at the top, get board engagement, get leadership engagement, examine your policies, your practices from an institutional standpoint, and create spaces for people to talk about race, to talk about racial injustice, their experiences before they got to your job, and their experiences within the job, and take what you learn from those conversations to build an inclusive environment for everyone.
Thank you, Colin. Anilu, Ashira?
Yeah, I would like to say what you mean and mean what you say. You have to be authentic. People know when it's coming because you really believe in it. And I know you've been hard at it. So this is a great community. Rely on each other, but also have confidence in what you know.
And courage.
Because you have been preparing for this moment, and now it's here. So have courage, but do it because you really believe in it.
That's right.
Fantastic. Ashira?
I would say, Anilu, you were very articulate, genuinely in what you said, that I appreciate, in that the words come pretty cheaply, and we can all say things and read things and listen more. And if we don't make little changes to lots of things, we won't make changes at all. And I think I would just encourage people to realize that if you add an inch to your perspective, you add a mile to your worldview. And in little changes in lots of places will go a long way. It doesn't have to be change everything all at one time overnight. But it has to be actions, and it has to be real, not just not just talk. The conversations are helpful for understanding, for really getting into another person's head, for all the things that Andrew said. Experience what they're feeling and understand that it's not your perspective, someone else's completely different experience, and then figure out what you can do to change it. I think
Thank you, Ashira. Thank you. Powerful. Thank you all for being with us in this first panel of the day. We have everybody, please stay tuned. We have one more panel. We're going to be covering, more of the conversation. Stacy, Andrew, Colin, Anilu, and Ashira, thank you so much for being with us today. And I know